Poets: Bishop, Broadstreet, Dickinson, Cummings, Kunitz, Longfellow, Frost, Olson, Sexton, Platt, Lowell. What do all these poets have in common? They all hail from Massachusetts. And yet, the state of Massachusetts is only one of two that does not have a poet laureate. There is a bill under consideration in Boston, but we still not have passed anything to make it official. But here in Andover, we can celebrate our brand new poet laureate. You may ask what and why we have a poet laureate. We are going to find out. Today, my guest is Leslie Malice, and she is a member of the 8-person committee that has been charged with the task of selecting and appointing the town's poet laureate. This is Something About Andover, and I'm Champa Bilwakesh. Welcome to another edition of our show. Welcome to our show, Leslie. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here and to talk about the Poet Laureate Initiative.
Yeah. So tell me about how the committee was formed, the history or the origins.
That was a real group effort. For the longest time, there were so many of us around town for the past few years saying, you know, we have such a great heritage in poetry in Andover, the home of Anne Bradstreet, the first recognized American poet back in the 1600s. Other towns in Massachusetts have their own poet laureate, Gloucester, Somerville, large towns, Newburyport, Andover, Amesbury, then out in the western part of the state. So why not Andover? We need a poet laureate. And a number of us were saying this for a couple of years, and we were all kind of spinning in our own little circles, and then finally, the beginning of 2016, we came together. Memorial Hall Library was a huge help to us. They gave us a lot of administrative support, and we began to meet and formulated some guidelines for the role of a poet laureate, what the poet laureate would be. And, that had to come, the approval for a poet laureate had to come from the selectmen and from the town manager.
That is the approval to have a poet laureate,
Yes.
or approval as to who it will be?
Well, both. So first of all, they had to approve the position of a poet laureate, which fortunately they did. And so from there, we kind of went forth and spent a couple of months trying to come up with guidelines for the poet laureate, for the position. What exactly would it entail? How would we go about finding this poet laureate? What were we seeking in a poet laureate? Took us a few months to come up with the guidelines.
Okay, so you had a lot of support from the town.
We had a lot of support from the town. We had tremendous support from Memorial Hall Library, Stephanie Traina. We also had huge support from Karen Klein, who is the former poet laureate of North Andover.
Okay.
Karen's a force of nature and tons of energy and supported us all the way.
What was the process? Did you advertise somewhere that you're opening up submissions for?
We did. We publicized it everywhere we could think of. We put up flyers. We posted online. We used the Memorial Hall Library's very extensive online network. We had articles in the Townsman. We basically we went through the poetry online places.
Okay.
So we searched. And
how many applications did you get?
when we started the process, people said to us, oh, the first time around you won't get many. You'll be lucky if you get 3 or 4. We got 12.
Oh, good.
So that was huge. So we were thrilled that we received 12.
Great. How did the selection process take place with your applicants?
It was difficult because the terrific thing was in each and every one of those 12 applications, there was merit. There was not a single one that we, looked at and rolled our eyes and said, "Oh, no, what is this?" They all had something that was very worthwhile to consider. But we went through the packages that they submitted because they, in addition to submitting their poetry, they also had to submit a vision statement, what they thought they would bring to the role of a poet laureate. And we went through all of that, read it very carefully. From the 12, despite the fact that they were all strong, we were able to winnow it down fairly easily to 6. And then we began the in-person interview process. And that was a very lengthy section. We met with each and every one of those 6 finalists. We spoke with them, listened to them read their poetry, asked them how they felt about being a poet laureate, about working with the public, with kids in the schools, what did they feel that they could bring to the role. We narrowed that down to 3. And from there, it still was pretty obvious that our pick was going to be Linda.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
So did you have any criteria as to what you wanted them, what you wanted out of them?
Oh, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. First and foremost, of course, it was excellence. That was the prevailing point. From there, it was why did they want to be a poet laureate? What did they feel? What was their reason for applying? What did they feel that they could bring to the role?
And what was the town's motivation in wanting to have a poet laureate? It's not something that is part of their business in the usual sense.
It's not, and yet why does anybody have a poet laureate? You know, why does the United States, you know, we have an official U.S. poet laureate. England has a poet laureate. Why were there poet laureates way back in ancient Greece? I think it's a
part of bringing culture into
it's a part of bringing culture into life. I mean, technically, the definition of a poet laureate is to bring a greater recognition to poetry and the spoken word, and to raise the art and awareness of the art of poetry.
Yeah.
But beyond that, I mean, it really is the vision. It's, you know, something greater than all of us. It promotes a sense of community. I think, to have people excited about poetry, and you know, we have the poet laureate going out and speaking with students in the schools, with senior citizens. It's something that brings us all together.
And also, it raises the profile of Andover, that it's a cultural capital.
It does, because we have, you know, that's I still think that the cultural community of Andover is our town's best hidden secret.
Yeah,
we have an incredibly rich and wonderful cultural community, and the issue is getting that word out there to people.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, good job, and thank you for providing us with a poet laureate for your committee, and thank you for coming to talk to us.
Thanks for having me.
Linda Flaherty Haltmaier is our new poet laureate of Andover. She is an award-winning poet and screenwriter. Her poetry has appeared in numerous journals and anthologies. She has won awards, several awards and recognition, including a nomination to the 2016 Pushcart Prize for Poetry. Her book of poetry, Rolling Up the Sky, won the Homebound Publications Poetry Prize. A graduate of Harvard University, Linda lives with her husband and daughter in Andover, and she is, as I said, our new poet laureate. Welcome to our show, Linda.
Thank you for having me.
And congratulations on your new position.
Thank you very much. It's a very exciting position for me.
And we are excited.
Yay.
So why poetry, and why now?
I think poetry's time has come. I think that in this age of information, we're just awash in information, but we're hungry for meaning. And I found that after the election in particular, don't know if you noticed it, but particularly online and in social media, there was just this surge of poetry, sort of this outpouring. And I think it's because people were having feelings that they didn't quite know how to express, and poetry was a way for them, something to turn to where the difficult, the ineffable could be expressed in words in a way that they could say, yes, that's how I feel, that's it right there.
That's a great way of putting it. So it's very intense, and it brings your feelings right to the core.
Yes.
Very nice. So can you talk about what moves you personally to write your poetry? Is there something you want to say?
I think I've written my entire life. I've written short stories. I started when I was, in 3rd grade, and I've written journals, and I've started out with novels and then screenplays and poetry. So words and stories have always been a part of sort of my essence and who I am. So words are continually swirling in my head, phrases and ideas, and poetry for me is a way to capture those phrases, those feelings, and crystallize them and put them into a form that makes sense to me, that I can take a moment. Like I was writing today, and I was writing about a moment at the dinner table when I was a child, something that was important to me. And it was just a phrase and a moment that brought me back, and then I felt compelled to write. I had a painting teacher that told me once, don't be a painter unless you can't not be a painter. And I feel the same way about writing. I'm compelled to write. So my poetry is something that I almost don't have an option. It's something that comes through me that I need to do.
But why poetry? Just when you want to write, why do you choose poetry?
There's something for me about the challenge of the form, about distilling down and compressing words into kind of their most important, their most meaningful.
And it's this an immediacy when you put
Yes.
it into writing. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So your one of your poems recently won a competition. Tell us, and congratulations.
Thank you very much. Yes, over the
tell us about
weekend
it.
I found out that a poem that I had written is called an ekphrastic poem, which is a Greek word meaning a poem that's inspired by a work of art. So my poem won the Palm Beach Poetry Festival competition, and it was a competition based on the adjacent museum. When you go to the Palm Beach Poetry Festival, it's held in this beautiful complex that has a museum. So my poem was written and inspired by one of the pieces there, which were these 3 mannequins, female mannequins that were encrusted in mirror. And so my poem was entitled The Muses. And it was kind of, for me, about what I imagine muses look like and how they come visit us. So it was sort of about, in a way, the history of poetry. I don't know, I get inspired by things like that.
It sounds lovely. I have to read it.
Thank you.
So what do you think about your position as the Poet Laureate? I know it has a long tradition, goes way back. And what do you think you're going to bring to Andover?
Well, it's been a year now, so I'm kind of in the thick of it. And I think it took me a little bit to kind of find my balance and my speed, because I just wanted to dive in and do everything all at once. And now we're laying the foundation, I feel like, for going forward, for keeping poetry in the forefront on the Andover cultural scene. I'm really loving it. Doing workshops, I'm doing readings, I'm going into schools, doing all sorts of different things to just bring poetry to people. And I think a lot of people have mixed feelings about poetry or no feelings at all, because it was sort of foisted on them when they were kids and they had to learn a poem, instead of, this is an amazingly enjoyable and wondrous art form that is accessible. It's not, you don't need a map and a dictionary to decipher every poem. I don't think poetry should be like that. I think poetry should be readily accessible, so that the person reading it isn't saying, what is this?
Yeah. I think that is probably true for most people, is that there is a certain kind of difficulty in accessing poetry. So it'll be nice to know how to read a poetry and enjoy it.
Right,
Yeah.
right. It was just a chore for most people in high school, instead of a joy. And I want to bring the joy back.
Well, I was taught to learn poetry by heart, like Wordsworth and Shakespeare.
Yes.
And it was a chore, but now I'm glad I have those words with me.
That's true. I am too, right.
Yeah. So you conduct poetry workshops. Do you
Yes.
conduct for both mostly school children, or do you have adults?
Mostly adults so far, but we do get a fair number of teens that come, which I love. And also I work with school children, and kids are natural poets, because kids haven't had their brains sort of marinated in cliches. So they'll, instead of the snow blanketed like a carpet, or they'll come up with something new and fresh. And so kids are natural that way. The way they use language is very exciting and off kilter, which makes poems interesting. And with adults, it can be a little more tricky to get them to express. There's, adults are always afraid of, well, what if I'm terrible? What am I, that nobody wants to be embarrassed. So in my workshops, I tend to do a lot of exercises that kind of loosen people up so that it's not high stakes, just low stakes. Just get something on paper, and you know, I'd use different prompts for them, you know, 6 words or a certain form, or I haven't done haiku, but different forms of kind of smaller poems, and that can inspire them to get moving and not feel like, I'm going to be terrible at this.
So do you think there's a benefit to teach people how to write poetry in any way? Does it make them feel things more or express themselves better? Or
I think so. I did this amazing exercise at the last workshop just a few weeks ago, and it was Ross Gay is one of our foremost poets in America right now, and he was at the Palm Beach Poetry Festival. And he brought us through this exercise of asking these 5 questions that were very avant-garde, very weird questions. One of them was, what animal do you become when you laugh? Another one that I loved was, what is the smell of your first sorrow? So you get in pairs and you ask each other these questions, and amazing answers start flowing out of people's mouths. And then each person wrote a poem based on the other person's answers. And it was so dynamic, and the room at different points was so loud and so full of energy. But at the end of, you know, the 16 people that were there, every single person read their poem, which was, to me, it almost makes me want to cry.
Yeah.
Because they started out, you know, kind of scared and shriveled, and by the end, they were sharing and excited.
that sounds great.
Yeah.
Do you think anybody can write poetry, though?
I do. I think if there's a willingness and an openness, it's kind of tapping into what's inside of you. A poet that I really admire, Mark Nepo, said that poetry is the unexpected utterance of the soul. So I think a lot of poetry is slowing down, tuning in to sort of the low hum of your soul. What's going on in there? What is it that you want to express that's deeply, deeply you? So I think anyone can do that.
But you have to be in that special place.
You do. And Americans are busy, busy, busy people. And poetry doesn't come from that place of busyness. It comes from stillness.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So, would you share your poetry with us today?
Sure, sure. I'll read the title poem of Rolling Up the Sky. Rolling up the sky. It snaps shut in one quick curl. I tuck the clouds in my pocket, even the puffy rain clouds, coax the finches and blue jays under my hat, and tell the stars to wait for me. I squeeze the sky under my arm like a baseball bat and head out. There's a life beyond this place, and when I get there, I'll roll out the sky, lie down in the cool grass, and watch the birds find their place among the patient stars. Thank you.
Thank you. That's lovely. Thank you for coming to the show.
Thank you for having me.
And congratulations on your position, and good luck with your career and the rest of the time you're going to be with us.
Thank you very much. I'm enjoying it.